Hi good people, Titus here for part 11 of our Asteroids mini-series, and in this video we'll work on creating the UFO enemy type that flies around the map and antagonizes our player. Let's not waste any time and jump right into it. Alright, so I think starting off we're going to create some folders. So we'll come to our Blender folder, and we'll do new folder, and I'm going to just call this UFO. You can of course use any marketplace item you want, or you can do what I did, just make it in Blender. You can even animate it, import the animations, and texture it. So I went ahead and did that. I got a simple static mesh here that I'll bring over. And I did do some animations, or I did one animation, so I will check that box here. And then the defaults are fine, so I'll just hit import all. And then it should bring those in okay. I did also texture the UFO, so I'll bring in my texture maps that I made from Marmoset. And then from there, we can actually start creating the materials. So we're going to go to the materials folder, right click, create new material. We'll call it m_UFO. You can open that up here and dock it in the parent window. It's pretty simple to make these materials. I can press Control Spacebar, go to my Blender folder, UFO, and I can just drag in my texture maps. The albedo, you take the RGB channel and just plug that in a base color, because it's basically color. And then the normal is the blue one, so I can take the RGB channel, plug that in normal. And then I also have a mix map. A mix map is basically multiple channels that contain different elements. So for my mix map, I have the red channel going into my ambient occlusion. I have my green channel going into my roughness, and I have my blue channel going into my metallic. And that's how I baked it from Marmoset. And that's my simple texture map. With that created, we can work on creating the animation component. So like I said, I did make an animation layer on this static mesh. So let's just go to our content folder. We're going to create a new folder, and we'll call it anim, or anims. And inside that folder, we can right click, create new animation, and then we'll just choose animation blueprint. You got to choose the skeleton for the rig that you import. Unreal Engine will automatically bring that in if it detects an animation layer on there. So I got the UFO enemy skeleton, I can choose that, and then hit create. And I'll just call it ABP_UFO. And this one's going to be really simple, because I only have one animation, I don't need to worry about states. I can just take the animation that it brought over, drag it in, and then just plug it up and hit compile, and pretty much good. See, it only plays once, so I'm actually going to go ahead and check the loop animation. And then I did frame it out in Blender, so it'll basically look like it's doing it cycling perfect. But it is a bit fast. I think I'll slow it down, so I'm going to set the play rate to maybe 0.25. Yeah, I think that's a little better. That way you can kind of see it kind of moving around. Alright, we'll save that, and that completes our animation component. The next thing, we'll want to make some accent pieces here. So go back to materials. We have an emission base. We can just simply right click, create a new material instance. We'll just call it mi_UFO. And I'm thinking maybe a classic green. So maybe we just bring it down here. Click OK. I'm going to leave it at a base 100, and I think that'll look just fine for the effect that I'm going for. Finally, we can come into our blueprints folder, and we can start making the blueprint class that's going to house this UFO enemy. So we'll just right click, create new blueprint class. You can do a couple different ways. You can do like a pawn, you can even do a character. I'm actually just going to get away with doing an actor. This is going to be a very simple AI logic, and I'm going to call it BP_UFO, and then I'm going to open that up here, and let's begin building this out. Control Spacebar, I'm going to select my skeletal mesh. With it highlighted, I can come to the component section and hit add. It'll make a reference to my skeletal mesh. I can choose that, press enter to lock it in, and now I have my my base item here. Now what we can do is we can begin adding some of the materials we created. So under element 0, we can do m_UFO. And that way you can kind of see the colors coming through a little better. I have a secondary element that I put in Blender as well for the emission. So that one I can do mi_UFO, and that'll be my little emission item that I use. And we'll probably use the same color for the laser fire that we're going to have the alien shoot, but we'll probably do that in a later video. For the animation class, we can just tell it to use the ABP_UFO. And then just like that, we're kind of basically cooking with gas here. Now one other thing we'll want to add for this is a box collider. So we'll hit add. You can just search colliders, or maybe collision, and choose box collision. And I'm just going to call it box collider. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to slide this into the default scene root, and I'm going to make it as the new root. And then I will attach the static mesh underneath it. With the box collider selected, I need to make it a little bit bigger because I can't see it. I think if we maybe just do a 200 by 200 by 100, I think that'll be just fine for what we're going for. If we switch to the top perspective, you can see that's just wide enough where it'll detect any collision, like the player or another rock or laser fire. So that way we can trigger our code appropriately. We'll come back to perspective here. The other things we'll want to do is, it's probably not necessary, but we might as well set it just to be safe, because we're going to be driving the logic with simple, we're going to be basically manually adjusting the translation, sort of manually moving it, but we might as well set the gravity and the Z constant just to account for it. So with the box collider selected, let's go ahead and find enable gravity. We'll check that off. And then under constraints, we only move in the XY. We will lock the Z axis. And that's just so something bumps into it, it doesn't go too high or too low where then it can't collide or do something. I don't suspect that'll happen, but yeah, just to be on the safe side. And that will pretty much cover the foundation of our UFO enemy. Let's make some adjustments in our game manager to kind of prepare for it here. So let's open the game manager up. All right, and there's going to be a few things I want to do. I think when I spawn the enemy UFO, I want to kind of pause throwing rocks at the player, just because I think it's a little bit too busy on the screen. We did that already with this little pause timer by handle. Since we're going to be doing it again, we might as well create a function for it, because we're kind of doing it repeatedly, so might as well. So we'll do a custom event, and we'll call it just pause rocks. And we'll have another one, custom event. We'll do unpause rocks. And then it's going to be pretty simple. We're basically just going to copy this code over here. So we can just grab our rock spawner reference, drag off that, and do pause timer by handle. And then I can just basically Control D to duplicate that over here. And then we can search for unpause timer by handle. And that's basic functionality for these two events. I think they're pretty straightforward there. And then what you can do is, for any of these references, that was the unpause. So you can just call the unpause function or event. And you can see this one right here is the pause. pause rocks, and then hook up the function like that just to replace it. And then that way we can also, in the UFO, we'll be able to cast to the game mode, and then we'll be able to remotely pause throwing the rocks at the player while the UFO is shooting the player. And then when the player destroys the UFO, we can tell the UFO to call into the game manager and start throwing the rocks again. And I think that's how we'll handle that logic there. But we also need to handle the spawning of the UFO, and to do that we need a function. So we'll go to our functions, create a new one, and we'll just call this the enemy spawner. Be pretty simple. We'll come into a branch node, so you can hold B, click into the graph, and then when this evaluates to true, we'll come into a spawn actor from class. The actor in question will be BP underscore UFO. And then we're going to right click on the transform and split it. Now we need to figure out where we want to spawn the actor. And we also need to control the condition. Let's create one variable. Variable we'll call is enemy spawn question mark, and we'll leave it as a boolean. And then we can hold control, drag it in so it does a get reference. We can come into a not boolean, and then we can come into an and boolean, hold control, and I'm going to put this down here, and then I'm going to drag off here into a random boolean. The reason I'm coming into a random boolean, which is basically just a random yes no, I don't always want to spawn the enemy, so I'm going to set it to trigger. I'm going to trigger this function by a timer, so I'll tell it to run every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds or every 20 seconds. I don't want the enemy to spawn every single time. I want it to be a random chance. So, when the timer hits the threshold, it'll run this random check, and if it gives a yes, it'll spawn it, assuming it hasn't already spawned in. If it's already spawned in, we don't want to have two UFOs fighting the player. So the way we do that is, after we spawn, we will of course set the enemy spawn. So you can hold Alt, drag this in, and we'll change that to true. And then we'll change it back to false on the UFO when we cast into the game manager. So when the UFO dies, we have to cast the game manager to start up the rock spawning again, or the rock throwing. So we can also just use that same cast, and we can set this to false. That way it has the ability to spawn again. Alright, so we go back to our event graph. We can come into maybe begin play. So just like we did with the rock spawner, we will just drag this back a bit. We'll come into a set timer by function name. Function name has to match the name you gave it, so we called it enemy spawner. Tell it to loop. I'm just going to run it every maybe 5 seconds starting off, and then we might as well right click, promote it to a variable. We'll call it enemy spawner reference, and we'll hook these pins up like that. But now we need to go back to our enemy spawner, and we need to figure out where we're actually going to spawn this UFO. So I think we'll handle the movement in a later video, because this one's already getting a little bit long. So I think just for testing, we'll just come into a maybe select vector, and then maybe we'll choose one to be at 400, and then we'll do one at like negative 400, and then off the boolean we can just tell it to do a random bool. Alright, so let's play this and see what this looks like. So every, I think, 5 seconds it has a chance to spawn the UFO there. I can't destroy it or get rid of it, and because I can't destroy it, it means another one will not spawn. Let's try that again. And there it is again. So you can see it's working pretty good. And I think we'll handle the movement using like a couple different points on the map where we can actually tell the UFO to actually translate between while it's randomly shooting or shooting at the player. So we'll figure that out kind of later. But all right, good people. We'll cut the video here to keep it short, but in the next one, we'll set up the code to actually move the UFO around. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.